I think you have to judge this Impact in two ways. As a regular Impact, and as a Slammiversary hype show. Did it make you interested in next week's Impact? Did it make you interested in the pay-per-view? Because if you asked 10 people which show they thought was supposed to be more important after watching this, you'd most likely get a lot of varying answers. The opener was one of the better segments of the night, with Kurt Angle and EC3 hyping up their title match, what they're calling the biggest title match in the history of the company, which will take place, you guessed it, on next week's Impact. They're both selling it very well. You can tell EC3 especially is invested in this. It's a strong segment for the most part, at least until EC3's chosen opponent for Kurt Angle tonight is revealed to be Matt Hardy, who I suspect TNA thought was a much bigger deal than I did. That was kind of underwhelming. No disrespect to Matt, but he's not going to be a problem for Kurt Angle, and he wasn't. Still a pretty good segment, the promos were solid, but that part kind of deflated things a bit. Then we have our triple threat match to crown a new X Division champion, which is happening on TV instead of the pay-per-view. Quite frankly, the match itself meant very little compared to the much more important stuff going on here. Namely, that despite my fears that TNA had completely taken leave of their senses, Grado did not win the match, did not become X Division champion. Thank God.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Our new X Division champion, Tigre Uno. I have no idea how Tigre Uno goes from the X Division's designated jobber who can't win a match to save his life to X Division champion within the span of 2 matches with no build-up whatsoever, but in this case, I really don't care. Does it make sense? No. Is it better than Grado being the X Division champion? Yes. That said, will anything significant really come out of this? I doubt it. I suspect Tigre Uno will end up much like a lot of other recent X Division champions have. Rarely, if ever, actually defend the title, and ultimately not do much of anything with it. It's not his fault. The X Division just doesn't mean much to TNA these days. I think we've exposed a really huge flaw in the Feast or Fired concept. If someone can open the Fired case, lose their job, then show up in the crowd after less than a year, jump the security barricade, illegally attack the talent to the point where they get arrested, and then somehow get rewarded for this with a chance to win their job back. Please explain to me how that works.
This is unbelievable. This doesn't make any sense.
So they do Angelina Love versus Velvet Sky, where if Velvet wins, she gets her job back. Oh, God. They had the match we all knew they would have. It was boring and not very good. And of course, Velvet wins because TNA just can't bring themselves to cut the cord for reasons I'll never understand. The only real talking point here is Velvet's new attitude, where she's trying to act like some kind of tough badass chick now.
I'm laughing at you.
Velvet Sky is not a badass. In any way, shape, or form. She doesn't have the size, doesn't have the athleticism, doesn't have the talent. She's like some 12-year-old idiot who really wants to be a badass and thinks that all it takes to be a badass is shopping at Hot Topic. And it's every bit as awkward and unintentionally funny as you'd expect. And now Velvet is back on the roster. Again. Well, that's just fucking marvelous. She was irrelevant and doing nothing interesting in her last run, and now she can be irrelevant and do nothing interesting in this run. Huzzah! Who are you, mysterious woman? Wolves Dirty Heels match number 4, Full Metal Mayhem. Great match. Great fucking match, make no mistake. One that left you wondering how they could possibly top themselves in match number 5. In fact, this match was so great that some of you might have been tricked into thinking that it should have taken place at Slammiversary. Is that what you thought? Is that what you thought? Oh, you ignorant fools. That's not the kind of thing you put on a pay-per-view. See, a pay-per-view, as in a show you want people to pay money to see, is the show where you put matches that are just hyping up stuff that'll happen on free television. In this case, they do Full Metal Mayhem on Impact, then book Aries versus Richards for the pay-per-view, fighting for the right to choose a stipulation for the final match in the series to crown new tag team champions, which will happen, you guessed it, on Impact. And then Jeff Jarrett showed up.
Say what?
And oh look, he brought Karen with him too. Well, this is certainly a thing that is happening, isn't it? Surprising? Yeah. I'm sure most of us never thought this day would come, myself included. So, kudos for keeping this under wraps. I really never saw it coming. And it's here that we get a number of big revelations in rapid succession. 1. Slammiversary is this Sunday, which I didn't know about because TNA didn't bother to mention it until this week. 2. The King of the Mountain match is back, which I didn't know about because TNA didn't bother to mention it until this week. And 3. TNA has invited Jeff Jarrett to be in the King of the Mountain match. So that's one person we know is in it as the go-home show goes off the air, and the match is this Sunday. I almost forgot how self-indulgent the Jarrett's promos can be. It seems like they went out there with a very specific to-do list. Plug GFW 500 times, pretend to cry to evoke some cheap sympathy heat from the crowd, plug GFW another couple hundred times, and then mention something about King of the Mountain and the pay-per-view if you get around to it. Oh, and be sure to take way more time than you need, and let Karen talk when she doesn't have to, so the segment runs long, and the only segment setting up Magnus versus James Storm, the biggest feud they had going into the pay-per-view, has to be cut from the show entirely. Still in top form, Jarrett's, it's like you never left at all. How you felt about this depends on how you feel about Jeff and Karen. Personally, I find their presence very tiresome, and I have no desire to see Karen on my TV ever again. But this was a legit shocking moment that had a lot of history behind it, both good and bad. And if you want to tell me that the guy who founded the company deserves to be in King of the Mountain and leave on his own terms, well, I won't argue with that. Will it draw any legit interest for the pay-per-view? I don't think so. Especially not with only 4 days to get the word out. Still, credit to Double J for actually making me aware that King of the Mountain was happening this Sunday, because apparently the writers and advertising department could not be bothered to do that themselves. And I have missed the King of the Mountain match. I think it should be a part of Slammiversary, so that's a good thing. But what's happening in it? There's no story here, no build-up, there were no qualifying matches. It's Jeff Jarrett and a bunch of completely random people who, as of 11 p.m. Wednesday night, were never even announced, mind you, in a gimmick match that TNA didn't think was a big enough deal to promote until the last fucking minute. So really, the only selling point for this match at all is Jeff Jarrett, a man who seems like he's there mostly just for shameless self-promotion. Wow. So Bram beats Crimson, beats Joseph Park, and this week Vader comes out. Another surprise. Cool to see a legend pop up once in a while, so I figure they'll give the old-timer a moment or two to get his spots in, and then Bram destroys him and gets put over. Not so. It turns out Bram has a lot of trouble with Vader and has to get himself DQ'd, even though they said these open challenge matches would all be no DQ, because for some reason, an overweight old man is too much for Bram to handle. Maybe I'm not seeing the bigger picture here, but I really fail to see what this does for Bram at all.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
And then Matt Morgan, of all people, makes the save. And okay, another surprise. Is this a return for Matt Morgan? I kind of doubt it. More likely it's just something to put over the Bram angle, which I'm fine with. But if Bram couldn't even beat the old-timer, how the hell's he supposed to beat Matt Morgan? Wouldn't it have been more beneficial to Bram if he had soundly defeated Vader, pinned him, destroyed him post-match, and have that be what brought Morgan out? I'm just asking. And I'm assuming that Bram versus Morgan will be happening at the pay-per-view now. Some people on Twitter told me that it would be, but I don't recall ever seeing an official announcement about that. If they made one, I missed it, so who the hell knows? Eric Young versus Chris Melendez happened. I wasn't impressed with it, and I confess I didn't really care about it either. I still don't see any mileage for a feud here, and hopefully it's done now. After being off the show for several weeks, the Rising and the BDC just randomly start brawling. And they're going to have another match now, I think at the pay-per-view, but to be honest, I'm not sure. And I don't know about you, but to me, this storyline feels like it has completely stalled. It's not going anywhere. They're not fighting about anything anymore, they're just fighting. Because they've got nothing else to do. Like the writers started this feud without knowing where it was going or how to finish it. If there's any more story here, then let's have it already, because the whole thing just feels like it's spinning its wheels at this point, and I'm rapidly losing interest. And adding Hernandez to the mix? That doesn't help. Why on earth would you bring him back? You couldn't just let Lucha Underground keep him? After Los Stereotypicos tanked as horribly as they did, to say nothing of the god-awful crap fest that was Mexican America, you still think there's money in this guy? I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Of all the greats I have studied, I assure you I have never heard of that man.
Kurt Angle, Matt Hardy is the main event. The match is fine, but it's really just killing time until EC3 shows up. And after the opener was all about Angle swearing to make EC3 tap out in their title match next week, and EC3 swearing that he never would, Angle grabs him in the ankle lock and makes him tap out here. Although that was not part of a sanctioned match, so it totally doesn't count, and our Lord of Wrestling has still never submitted to anyone and he never will. Pretty good final hype for Angle EC3, and this would have been great build-up to a big pay-per-view match, potentially even a big pay-per-view main event match, if the match wasn't happening, you guessed it, on Impact. Instead, the pay-per-view main event this Sunday will likely be either a multi-man match where the only participant announced at the time of this recording is a man who's there mainly to promote another company, or a grudge match between two guys who didn't even appear on the show this week because they were so unimportant that they got cut for time. Gotta tell you, TNA, if that was your hard sell for Slammiversary, you didn't exactly blow my socks off. I came away more interested in seeing Impact next week than the pay-per-view this Sunday. And since the pay-per-view is the one you want me to pay money to see, that's a problem. As a pay-per-view hype show, this was a failure. No two ways about it. It did make me anticipate Impact next week, but that's mainly for the Angle EC3 title match and not much else. So I am excited for that at least. For Slammiversary? Not really. It just doesn't seem like the show is a big priority to the company. I'm actually having trouble finding out what the full card is. And if I'm having a problem like that after watching the Go Home show, then maybe TNA should take a step back and think about where they went wrong here. Over. Out.